And then we could just hear some yelling and screaming from the other tent. What followed then was a moment of trying to make sure that they were okay in the other tent. At that point, truthfully, I had a very bad feeling that maybe they had actually, that someone had taken a direct hit from the lightning, that maybe their tent had been hit. It had clearly hit right on our site, but we didn't know where at that point.
Welcome back to another episode of Facing Giants. Today I'm with Ian. How are you, Ian?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Yeah, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I know just bits and pieces of your story, but I don't know too much about it. But I think today we're going to be talking about your experience with lightning. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I can tell you the story.
Okay, great. So before we get right into it, how old are you?
50.
50 on the dot. And where are you from and where did you grow up?
Grew up in Ottawa. And then in 1992, moved up to Thunder Bay to come here for school at Lakehead, and then never left.
Never looked back, eh?
Never looked back.
What was it about Thunder Bay that kept you here, would you say?
Well, there was a few things that kept me here. After I finished school, I got work in the area, and so that work kind of morphed from one job into another, and they were all local, either to the region or to the city itself. And really proximity to the natural world in Thunder Bay, as anybody who lives here knows, that's one of the real gems about this place. And Lake Superior is magic. There aren't many places where you can drive 5 minutes out of the city and you're essentially in what most people would consider to be total wilderness, So I love that about this place. And in large part, that's what's kept me here. So.
Right. I thought you were going to say love, because that's what everybody says, that brings them and keeps them to Thunder Bay, because that's what got me here. But really what kept me here was the same as you just described. The outdoors here it's got a rawness to it that I really appreciate. And it's really grown on me. Lake Superior is another beautiful feature of this region. So describe to me what your relationship currently or in the past, what's your relationship with the outdoors? How do you best like to interact with the outdoors?
Well, so I came to Thunder Bay to go through the Outdoor Recreation Parks and Tourism program at LU. That was my interest from an early age. My parents sent me on canoe trips when I was quite young. Well, they took us on canoe trips when I was very young. And then when my teenage years, my folks would send me on canoe trips with various companies or camps and in the summertime and that kind of thing. So that was something I was interested in. The idea of going to a university program that was focused around that was pretty interesting to me. So I came up here and went through that program and pretty quickly got tapped into what I was talking about before, which is just this environment around Thunder Bay and the ability to do all the different things that it has to offer. So canoeing, sea kayaking, river kayaking, whitewater canoeing, hunting and fishing, and all of those things. So those things became really the biggest draw for me to stay here. And probably the biggest investment of my time outside of, work, in terms of pastimes and the things that I like to do. I like to be on the land. Right. So over the years since I graduated from rec in 96, I've had jobs where I guided canoe trips for many years with Outward Bound Canada. I worked there in the wintertime and worked in the dog sledding program, so did a lot of winter expeditions extended expeditions up on Lake Nipigon with dog teams. Yeah, that kind of stuff. So I feel like I've developed a pretty strong relationship with the natural world, and it's where I feel at home. It's where I'm comfortable. It's what, rejuvenates me. It's where I find my balance, all those things.
Yeah. A lot of what you just said just resonates so profoundly with me because I feel the same way. And I think a lot of people, a lot of the people that live here and stay here and enjoy being here, I think they make the outdoors a real big part of their lives. Especially if you are into canoeing and hunting and a lot of the things you just mentioned. I'm curious if you know, because in my mind, Thunder Bay area is probably the best in Canada for canoe tripping, like lake canoe tripping. Would you say there's anywhere around like in Canada that would beat this region for canoe tripping?
Honestly, I don't know if there is anywhere else. And it depends, I suppose, what kind of canoe tripping you want to do. If what you're looking for are huge, expansive whitewater rivers that go on forever, you might be looking to the territories, Nunavut and the Arctic rivers, or rivers in Yukon Territory, those kinds of places. What Northwestern Ontario has to offer, I feel, is just a really solid diversity, right? So if you can be strictly into lake tripping, you're not interested in whitewater tripping, you're happy to portage from lake to lake. You own a Kevlar boat, and you travel distances, and there's so much to offer in terms of the beauty of the lakes, incredible campsites, and just endless routes. I mean, endless routes. You can very easily, if you wanted to, put your canoe in the water at ice out and continuously paddle, without retracing your steps right until freeze up.
Yeah.
You could do that here.
Yeah,
which is incredible.
For
right?
sure.
And having grown up in Southern Ontario and spent a lot of time in Nova Scotia and various other provinces, I don't know that you can get quite that same experience.
Yeah.
In Northern Manitoba, Northern Saskatchewan, certainly lots of lakes, and we're rich in this country with fresh water and waterways and a rich history around those waterways, and that those waterways have been the arteries of our country since time immemorial with the Indigenous people, and then of course the fur trade and all of those things, right? So there's just an interconnectedness there for sure.
Yeah. So let's jump right into the experience you had. Could you detail the day for me, or detail what you were setting out to do, what you're setting out to accomplish prior to things going hairy on you?
So this was really a short little canoe trip we were going to take into Quetico Provincial Park. And by we, I mean myself and my wife and two kids. This is in July of 2020. And we were accompanied by one other family, husband and wife, and their boy. We had it planned out that it wasn't going to be an arduous canoe trip. It was going to be a pretty chill trip. We were going to go into Pickerel Lake in Quetico Provincial Park. There's a gorgeous site that we are familiar with. We've been there many times before. It's sort of a 5-star campsite. So it's the kind of place where you just want to go and base camp and bake bread and go fishing and set up the hammocks.
Bake bread, eh? I've never baked bread camping.
You know what? My wife is an amazing cook in any context, but when we're canoe tripping, she takes it to the next level. For sure. So, yeast breads or no rise breads. I mean, there's lots of different, ways to do it. But when you've got the time and you're doing those kind of layover canoe trips where you go and you find a nice campsite and you're just kicking back instead of being kind of on an expedition where you're picking up every day, packing up and traveling to your next site, So it was going to be a weekend trip. Nothing crazy. We not very far to go. And so my wife had gone in advance because I had to work through the week, and I was just going to head out on Friday and join them. So they were already in. So they had paddled west from the French Lake campground at Quetico, and we were going to rendezvous at this site. And we did that. So I went out after work. We paddled in there, and that was the Friday night, and we had a great night. We made pizzas. We had a real sweet night. And then the next morning was a layover day. So we weren't traveling that day. We decided we'd get up, we'd go fishing, we'd do some exploring, come back to the campsite, in the early evening, and with any luck, we'd have some walleye to cook up, and kind of have a pretty relaxing day. And so that was the night that the storm came in.
Mm-hmm. Now, on your way in or prior to setting off on the trip, was there any indication that the weather was going to be hairy? Or on your way in, did you notice any activity that worried you at all?
There was some forecast storms. Mm-hmm. So I tend to, or at least let me rephrase that. Before this happened, I took a fairly relaxed approach to weather. I mean, I figured, you know what, the weather is going to be what the weather's going to be. It's not something we can control. So, and we always have the equipment we need to stay warm and dry. So it's like, okay, what's going to be stormy? So I would give the forecast a glance, but not get too worried about it. Mm-hmm. And storms were forecast. There was some thunderstorms forecast. Now, my wife's experience, having gone in a day before us and paddling to the site, they had an experience with an electrical storm coming through earlier that day. It might have been the day before, but on their trip into that site where we were going to meet up. And they had to get off the water in a hurry. And my wife had expressed a real sense of anxiety that was unusual for her. Mm-hmm. She really felt like there was something in the air, that there was an intensity to the weather that was happening that weekend that had her feeling uneasy. So yes, there was that sense in the air, and the forecast was there. But the day in question was a beautiful day. Mm-hmm. There was some wind, but we had gone fishing in the Raw Narrows. We caught some fish. We had lunch, went for a swim, and the day actually went a little long. So our plan to head back earlier to the campsite got a bit derailed, and it sort of was pushing on evening time when we pulled back into the campsite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Now the evening, so the day in question, the day drew on a little longer than you expected. You got back to the campsite. Things looked okay. When did you start feeling like you were in for somewhat of an experience?
So we get back to the campsite. We unload the boats. We do have some fish, so we cleaned the fish, and we started cooking up fish tacos.
Nice
Man,
meal. You guys know how to do it. We do oatmeal and tuna. That's what we do. Man, you guys eat good.
I'll share our menu with you sometime.
Please.
So we're making fish tacos, which takes a little while because there's all the bits and pieces that you want to kind of have to put on top of your tacos. So we're cooking. There was some weather to the west, and by that I mean there was some dark skies to the west. And so we had set up a tarp. We had set about gathering some of our equipment from around the campsite to put it under the tarp in case we got rain. Right at that time, some of the food was ready. People were starting to eat. The sky to the west started to darken considerably. It was that black sky. But slightly to the north of that, we could see the sun setting through the clouds, and it was truly beautiful. I mean, it was those shards of gold pouring through dark clouds, over northwestern Ontario Lake. I mean, it was a really beautiful scene. But nevertheless, the darkness was foreboding. Like there was a sense that, okay, we could get a big dump of rain here. And enter my wife. Okay, this is where she comes into the story. She was keeping a closer eye than any of the rest of us on this approaching storm. We did start to see some lightning activity. The clouds were doing that strobe light effect a little bit. And then we heard lightning. Or I should say we heard thunder. We saw lightning. We heard thunder. Now, my wife and I, both having worked in the outdoor industry, we're sort of familiar with lightning protocol, like some of the ways that you would, consider risk and safety in electrical storms.
Yeah.
Right?
Really quickly, what would some of those protocols be?
Well, some of those protocols are just having a sense of how far the storm is away and how quickly it's approaching you. One of the ways you do that is you count the interval between the flash and the sound of thunder. Now, I don't know exactly what that computes to in terms of how far away the storm is, but nevertheless, if the flash to bang is what we call it is, 10 seconds, and then it's 6 seconds, and then it's 3 seconds, you know that the storm's moving quite quickly. And, lightning protocols in my previous experience working in the field was, you attempt to be at low ground. You don't want to be standing next to the tallest thing that idea that you don't want to be standing next to a lightning rod, obviously, right? And then you want to insulate yourself from the ground if you can. So back when I worked at Outward Bound, you would stand, you'd go into the forest and try and be away from high points of land or very, very tall trees, and you'd crouch down on your life jacket. So we were aware of those things. But truthfully, my wife was paying more attention. I was cooking up fish, frying up fish. I was fairly focused on what I was doing. I was thinking, okay, I should probably get my raincoat on. It's going to rain soon. And yeah, there's some lightning. There's some thunder. Jen was saying, okay, folks, I think we need to wrap up the eating and the cooking, and we need to think about moving to the tents. There was then a flash and about a 10-second interval to the thunder. My wife started collecting things and trying to clean up supper. The things had been kind of laid out on the ground, all the condiments and all the things. She was starting to collect those. There was then another flash and a bang that was about 6 seconds. My wife then said, okay, it's time to go. And I thought, okay, yeah, you know what? Fair enough. It's time to go. So I kind of put the pan down, and the family that we had been with started to move towards their tent. But my wife had the air that she was carrying herself with was anxious. She was very anxious. That was clear. And she was urging people to move now. That, just the way that she was being got people's attention, and people started to move.
Would you say that's uncharacteristic of her? Like to be like as urgent as she would be? Like, I don't know if she's like typically a calm, collected person, and then she became anxious, and then people knew like, wow, we need to take this seriously type thing.
Certainly in that context, yes, she's a pretty relaxed person. She's can roll with it, and we were having a beautiful night. So suddenly this changed where she became very serious and pretty directive, and was like, okay, folks, it's into the tent right now. And she has sort of told our kids, put your plates down, go. So, and at this point, the clouds were pretty on top of us. The wind picked up considerably, and it started to rain, and it really rained. I mean, those torrential, big raindrops, torrential downpour. So we made our way to the tent very quickly. One kind of humorous moment was that my daughter was the first one to zip open the vestibule of the tent and try and make her way into the tent itself. But of course, there's one more zipper you have to open, which is the screen, right? The actual door of the tent. She hadn't quite got her hand on the zipper to open the door of the tent. And my wife was so urgently trying to get her into the tent that she was pushing her with all of her might. And my daughter was sort of getting smushed against the screen and was yelling back, I don't have the door open. I don't have the door open.
Were you all in one tent?
We were all in one tent. Okay. And the other family, mom, dad, and their boy were in a separate tent. So we got into the tent. We zipped everything up, closed everything up, And the first thing that we did was to tell the kids, okay, blow up your air mattress as much as you can. We had already blown them up when we set the tent up, or they had already been set up from the night before. And we blew them up. And the kids were on regular thermarests, which are like maybe an inch thick. And my wife and I have sort of more cushy, bigger air mattresses. And our idea was just to get as insulated from the ground as possible. We were sitting up for a little while. We thought we'd just try and distract ourselves. We played a card game. And then my wife, suggested maybe we shouldn't be sitting up, because sort of the pressure points from our backside sitting on the mats would sort of compress them a little bit, and you might, you're sort of reducing the amount of insulation between you and the ground. And so we lay down, and then it was like, okay, let's just try and read, and we'll just try and ride the storm out. And then it happened. There was a blinding flash of light, and then a sound that I can only describe as a sizzling or frying sound. It was as if the air itself was rupturing and frying. I don't know how else to describe it. And then the sound of an explosion. We all had the sensation that we were lifted, quite literally lifted off of our thermarests. Our headlamps went out. We had a little solar light in the tent as well. That went out, so that we were momentarily in total darkness. The sound of the rain was deafening on the tent. Our lights then came back on, and there was a sort of a blue haze in the air, and a strong metallic smell or odor in the air. We, at that moment, we obviously knew what had happened, but we were all in a sort of a sense of shock. We all experienced headaches, like very instantaneously, a sort of a headache. And then we could just hear some yelling and screaming from the other tent. What followed then was a moment of trying to make sure that they were okay in the other tent. At that point, truthfully, I had a very bad feeling that maybe they had actually, that someone had taken a direct hit from the lightning, that maybe their tent had been hit. It had clearly hit right on our site, but we didn't know where at that point.
And it's not like you're confident that rushing outside to go check on them is the brightest idea at this point, considering your site just got struck by lightning.
That's exactly right. Yeah, no, it was basically the storm was still right on top of us. And so the sense was we checked in with each other to make sure that everyone was okay. We were all a bit shocky, but definitely were obviously physically fine. And we started to yell to the other tent, "Are you okay?" My recollection was hearing back, "No." The answer, no. But shortly thereafter, we were able to confirm that nobody was physically injured, that we were okay from that perspective. So that was the moment itself. Now, within about 15 minutes, the storm passed. So it was come and gone. It was a small cell, and it moved through very, very quickly. And there was in a very real way, the proverbial calm after the storm, right? It was like suddenly the wind died, the rain stopped, and it was just silence. We stepped outside the tent.
What time? So this would have been like in the nighttime, right?
So this would be at now probably 9:00 at night, I'm going to guess.
Yeah.
We stepped outside of the tent. It wasn't full dark yet. And at that point, we took in, what the damage that had been done to the campsite by the lightning.
What'd you see?
So 2 very large white pines that were, I'm going to say 15 feet, 5 meters from our tent had been directly hit by lightning. Both of them had big strips of their bark peeled from the very top of the tree. And these are enormous old growth trees, right straight down to the bottom of the tree.
Wow.
One of the trees looked like it had sort of been incinerated. You could see that scar where the bark had been blown off the tree, followed all the way down the tree to the root, and then you could see where it followed the roots. So there was actually bark, a maybe inch wide strip of bark peeled off all the way down to the root, and then where the root entered the ground. Mm-hmm. From there, what you could see was that the electrical charge had traveled through the roots. And what it looked like was that where that current reached the end of those roots, it would then explode out of the earth. So there were craters all over the campsite.
Wow.
Those craters were maybe for anything from half a meter to, probably half a meter around, maybe 6 to 8 inches deep. And rocks and mud and dirt and sticks were thrown everywhere. So we made our way over to the kitchen where we had been having dinner. We had, as I said, we had a tarp set up for the rain. The top side of the tarp was covered in mud and sticks. And our gear was scattered around, and some of it had been blown apart.
Wow.
So my wife's Gore-Tex rain jacket was in ribbons. It was lying on the ground, and it was completely blown apart. And it wasn't melted. It wasn't burned. It was just shredded. The material was shredded. So it was as if the force of the explosion had just ripped it apart.
Wow.
There were camp chairs, similar story. My son's swimming trunks were ripped right open. So there was extensive damage around the site.
How was your canoe?
Our canoe, the current actually did make its way down to our canoe and cracked the gunnels on one side of our canoe. Our tent, and this is where the intensity of the moment really hit home, was that you could see where the current had traveled from the tree to our tent, had gone underneath our tent, and had traveled through the tent poles. So where the current entered the tent poles, it went up and over, and where it exited the tent poles on the far side of the tent, there were craters.
Wow.
Underneath where the tent pole connected to the ground.
Unbelievable.
The tent poles had sort of at the joints on the tent poles themselves, they were welded. And there were sort of blast powder marks on all the joints in the tent poles. So very clearly the charge had come to our tent, had made its way through the poles, made its way under the tent, and by some, a combination of, I would say, luck and doing the right thing, at least to the best of our knowledge. I think we escaped injury or much worse.
Yeah, that is unbelievable. And to think that the force of it was so strong that you all felt like the boost from your sleeping mat. And that was like the instant that the current was traveling through and under your tent. So
that's right.
That is incredible. Enough to give you all a headache, which is pretty crazy. I'm curious about, because you had your 2 kids in the tent.
That's right.
How afraid, because at this moment, you've got to be the cool head for them in a way. How were their reactions to this situation? And how did you, being their parent who's supposed to protect them, and in a way you're kind of the expert in the field, how did that all play into your perception of the moment with them?
I think that was one of the harder aspects of this whole thing is, we take our kids out to these places and we share these experiences with them, and we know that there's inherent risk in traveling in the outdoors, right? But we have some experience in the outdoors, and we feel like we know how to mitigate those risks in a pretty significant way. And we, conservative decision making, and we use our judgment and our experience to do the right thing to stay safe, right? The experience of such a visceral moment of knowing that you can do all of the right things and still the chaos of the universe might hand you a card that says, your number's up. And in that moment, I think the kids, it was so loud. It was really terrifying, right? It was so loud. And there was, in a very real sense, such the electricity in the air was so profoundly nothing like anything any of us had ever experienced. We all had an immediate reaction, and so the kids did. There were some tears for sure. I think my wife, she was quite emotional in that moment. I didn't really feel that. I felt shock more than I felt emotion. So it didn't translate into tears for me. It translated into sort of a numbness. My wife was more sort of overt in how she was expressing what happened in that moment. And I think really there was just really a big, that dawning realization that we could have all been killed in this moment, or one of us could have been killed, or some of us, or whatever. And the family that we were with, they, I don't want to speak for them, but I would put it this way. I think we all shared a similar experience that way. My good friend who was in the other tent did actually feel the charge. He must have had his elbow off of his sleeping mat. So he did have an electrical charge run through his arm and up into his shoulder. He was fine. It was minor. But he had that experience. None of the rest of us actually felt like we had an electrical current actually pass through our bodies. So I think carrying that experience with us since this happened, that, as parents, we want to protect our kids, right? At all costs. This is what we do, right? And just that sense of trust that if we do the right things, we can protect them. And there's in that moment, and since that time, there's been something unsettling about that feeling that we can do, as I said, we can do all the right things, and still tragedy can happen.
Yeah. So once you've kind of collected yourself, assessed the situation, seen the damage that was done, it's the middle of not the middle of the night, but it's approaching dark, and I don't know how fun it is to canoe back with your broken canoe. Like, were there discussions about leaving the campsite that moment, or was it pretty unanimous and evident that you guys were going to stay the night?
It was evident we were going to stay the night. There was no going anywhere. None of us would have been in the kind of condition to be making those sorts of decisions. That's okay. Let's all pack up and now travel on Pickerel Lake, which is it's a considerably large lake, in the dark. And where would we go? I mean, like, we could move to another campsite, but we wouldn't have been able to paddle back to the vehicles that night. So there was no going anywhere. And then another storm rolled through.
Lightning too?
There was lightning. This time we were lucky. It was a glancing blow. It passed us to the north. And so we could see the flashes, we could hear the booms, but it came and went, and that was it. Yeah. That was it.
Enough to make the hairs on your neck stand up, though. I'm
definitely,
sure. Yeah,
definitely. So we went to bed. It took some of us some time to get to sleep. There was certainly some processing of what we had just been through. I did reach out. I do carry an inReach device with me when I go on canoe trips with the SOS function. Now, I didn't send out an SOS alert, but I did reach out to a couple of friends and just said, we've just had this experience and we're okay. Just checking in, and had some offers of assistance. Hey, do you need anything? We could come and pick you. We could come and try and help you guys out. And I said, no, you know what? We're fine. We're fine. Just checking in and letting you know that this has occurred. The next morning we woke up to very, very high winds out of the west. So this, it kind of seemed like this major storm system of that had been passing through the previous couple of days was pushing its way out now. And so it was followed by big winds out of the west, big enough winds that there was no going anywhere. Mm-hmm. So we were stuck on the site that day. So this is now Sunday. We were planning to pull out that day. I mean, the intention had been to travel out on Sunday back to the vehicles and back to Thunder Bay. There was something about that, though, that experience of, okay, we've just been through this thing together. We're all processing it in our own way, this kind of near miss experience. And now we're stuck on this site. We can't go anywhere. Mm-hmm. And we have to continue to just kind of deal with this and process it. I think that was really an important experience for us. Mm-hmm. And so what we did is we decided as the adults, we spoke with the other couple and we thought, okay, let's do something formal around this. Like, we could all just sort of try and go through the day and forget that it happened, or kind of talk about it a little bit and try and process it out loud. But let's actually do something formal in a sense and sit down in a circle and have a facilitated experience where we kind of debrief and process what this was like for the members of the group.
That's brilliant.
And we did that. And I'm just so glad we did. Like, it really gave a forum for us to validate what the kids might have been feeling but didn't want to say. Mm-hmm. They were able to see some pretty raw emotion from parents, So it wasn't just the stoic, parents, hey, kids, everything's okay. Mm-hmm. It was like, no, this was scary. This was scary. And this could have been much worse,
Mm-hmm.
And our friends really thanked my wife, quite literally, for saving their lives. Like, they really felt that. And both of them said, had you not been here, we probably would have sat back in our camp chairs under the kitchen tarp to watch the light show.
Eating fish tacos.
Yeah.
Wow.
And had that occurred, I mean, the damage under that kitchen tarp from the electrical current that was moving through that site was unbelievable. Mm-hmm. Right. So who knows what would have happened had they been sitting there. Yeah. So they really credited her with that. And I do too, frankly. Yeah. Like, I'm aware of lightning safety, and I was probably that night, more complacent than I should have been. So it really is a credit to her that we all got, in a hurry, made our way to our tents and we're safe,
Yeah. Well, good on her for trusting her gut, because you never want to be the person that's overreacting to a situation in the outdoors, because hysteria misplaced can be detrimental. But also there's the danger of becoming complacent. Like, how many times have you gone paddling, and how many times have you gone home and faced a storm and and nothing's happened, and then the one time, right? So it's I'm sure it was a solemn reminder that Mother Nature isn't to be taken too lightly.
For sure. The question after an event like that is like, do we change something? Mm-hmm. Do we keep doing the same thing? Do we stop canoe tripping? And really the answer is no. Like, it's in our blood. This is what we do. It's for so many reasons. And do we stop taking our kids out? Well, no, we don't do that either, right? But my experience out there is different now.
For sure.
It's different.
And what do you mean by that?
You know, when you go on a canoe trip, there's all sorts of things that could be potential risks, right? There's big water. If you're out on a big lake and the winds come up, there's, you know, you could swamp your canoe. There's tripping and fall hazards. Bears. There's whatever. There's a million different things that can happen. And again, like I said, you know, you use your judgment, and if you've got some experience, and most of us just know intuitively sort of how to stay safe, right? So, you know, I guess I'd always sort of felt like I could control the risk. What this incident taught me was there are those things that are just completely out of my control. It doesn't matter how well I manage the situation, right? That there is a randomness and a chaos in the world as well, that can just suddenly show up in any situation. And so, you know, now when a storm, like, you know, generally day to day out on canoe trips, and we were out again for 2 weeks with my wife and our 2 kids on Lake Superior this summer. And, you know, that comes with all of its own, you know, uncertainties on traveling on such a big body of water in open canoes and cold water and all that kind of stuff. But when the storms come through, I feel really uneasy. Like I feel a genuine, palpable sense of anxiety that I never had before. I always took it for granted that storms were kind of fun. They were intense. They were, you know, the light show was cool. The cloud formations were cool. And I really just somehow naively trusted that the universe would never like drop a lightning bolt right on my campsite.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's misplaced though. I think you know that the odds of anything like that happening are just so small. And if it were to happen to you, it would be extremely unlucky if something like that were to happen. So I don't think the naivety was misplaced. Right?
You know, and maybe you're right about that. I guess part of what I feel now though is it can happen, so maybe it will happen again. It can, and it did happen. Yeah. You know, I mean, after this occurred, like we, you know, come back into our life and everyone's like, did you buy a lottery ticket? So I do have that sense when we're weathering out a lightning storm now in our tent, I'm anxious for it to be over. Yeah. Like I want it to be over. I feel very uneasy and anxious. And we do all the same things that we did before. I think probably now I pay more attention even than ever before as to where we put our tent. When we're choosing a campsite, we're considering, is it a high rocky campsite with big white pines at the top, right? Which is the site that we were on was a fairly elevated site covered in huge old growth white pines, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, it's understandable because it's understandable that you do feel uneasy now going on into the future because inherently when you decide to go into the outdoors, especially in the way that you do, I think you're taking on risk. And I think that's part of the allure to the outdoors is that there's these elements of Mother Nature that we cannot control. And which is why you develop skill in them, and the skill and the knowledge goes such a long way. The thought of like, stay on your sleeping bag and keep your elbows off the ground, like that went a long way. And you know what I mean? Like, don't watch the light show from the vestibule, right?
Yeah.
That kind of thing goes a long way. Get off the water, right? So, but I think the unknown and the power of nature is part of the allure to why people like you and I make it a big part of our lives to go out there. But I do think it would be safe to say that it would be normal for you to be somewhat traumatized by the experience.
Yeah. Well, you know, I like that idea that trauma isn't, you know, what happens to us. It's what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us. And I do, I think trauma is probably an appropriate word. I don't feel like I carry this day to day as a traumatic experience, but it's in my cells. It really is when I'm sitting in a tent and there's, and not only sitting in a tent, actually, like if there's a lightning storm close by, in any context, I feel it. I feel it in my body. I feel a sense of anxiety. And it's sort of that, raising your shoulder to ward off a blow, just like you're waiting for it. Like you're kind of flinching and just waiting for the thing to happen. And it's very unlikely that it will, but it's kind of that sense. So yeah, I carry that with me, but the kids seem fine. They don't really seem to be particularly bothered by it. I think my wife, of all of us, would be the most openly emotional when we get into those situations these days. Like it's very real for her. It takes her back to that moment.
Well, here's the money question. We would all understand if you would never go on a canoe trip again, or you would never be caught dead in a lightning storm again. But why is it that you continue to open yourself to that experience again by continuing to go canoe tripping? Why is it that you continue to do that? And by no means am I criticizing you. I think this is a pretty incredible thing.
Because it's worth it. In this day and age where it's harder and harder in so many places to connect with what is real and what is tangible and what is in many ways, pure. It's harder and harder to find that. We're just so disconnected. I think we're disconnected from ourselves. We're disconnected from each other. We're disconnected from the land, and going out there does all of those things, right? It drives us into a deeper connection with ourselves, pushing through challenge and the discomfort of being out there sometimes, the physical strain of being out there when it's cold and it's raining and it's sort of miserable, and pushing through that and the growth that comes from that, right? And and I just can't think of a better way to reinforce those learnings for our kids these days. Like they need that. They need it, and I feel extremely privileged that we get to provide them with those opportunities. Not everybody can, and not everybody does, right? And even when you're in such close proximity to these kinds of places in Thunder Bay, there are so many people who can't access that. It's not accessible to everybody. So I recognize that. But we, and then connection with each other. We went out there. Well, that experience that we went through with that other family, we're indelibly connected through that experience, right? We shared something powerful together. This summer, like I said, we went out for another couple of weeks with our kids, just myself and my wife and our two kids for 2 weeks on Lake Superior. And I mean, that's golden, right? Like that. So it's just worth it. I don't know how else to put it. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. And, if we want to talk about risk, well, we could talk about, driving, down the highway in Northwestern Ontario, probably carriers. If you're considering sort of perceived risk versus actual risk, a lot of the risks that we experience out in the outdoors are they're perceived risks, but if you manage them and you take appropriate precautions and use your judgment, the risk is actually very, very small.
Right.
Well, driving on the highway in Northwestern Ontario, we all know that's a very real risk. So life is full of risk, right? And it's what you do with that, and I truly believe that risk and challenge is where we grow.
Yeah,
it's where we grow.
Beautifully said. I'll ask you one more question, and this one might be a little tricky, but work with me and we'll see where it goes. If you were to use your experience and draw a metaphor from it to kind of apply to your approach to difficult situations just in life on a whole, like what kind of lesson would you say that particular experience taught you, or that you could draw from it to apply it to life and struggles and difficulties in life on a whole, would you say?
I feel like life is fragile, and or it can be fragile. We see that more and more in the world, around us. And I guess for me, like, just that sense that we've weathered something as a family and as individuals, we've all processed it in our own way. Like, it's not what happens to us, it's what we learn from that. It's what we do with the things that we learn. I mean, life is full of that, right? And I guess, the idea that we can go through something like that, and it can be terrifying and it can be scary, but we're going to be okay. This comes up a lot in our family experience together, like the lightning storm, right?
Yeah.
And, without too much of a straying into the land of cliche too much, it's like that idea that you weather something big and that you can come out the other side of that okay, but that you can still, even now, years later, be vulnerable in moments because of that. The things that we're able to teach our kids through that experience. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but it's like life is going to be full of these moments, maybe not as intense and extreme as that. It's going to be full of these moments in little ways and in big ways, and hey, if I can teach my kids that, at the end of the day, like, you can have a near-death experience and you can use it in a positive way, and you can that you've gone through something big and you carry that with you, but it doesn't have to be who you are, So yeah.
No, beautifully said. I think I'm just imagining, your grandkids one day come, Grandpa, tell us the lightning story. Yeah, no, that was a phenomenal story. And I think a lot of what you said is true about not being defined by your experience, but using your experience and drawing strength from it and coming out the other side of your experience stronger and more aware. And I think that's absolutely right. And I think that's a message a lot of people could benefit from, for sure. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's an incredible story, and I'm so glad we got to talk today.
Yeah, you're welcome. No, thanks for having me on. It's fun to share it again.
For sure. Okay, have a good night.
You too.